What comes to mind when the words World War I are mentioned? Well, let me guess. The ghastly nightmare of trench warfare, futile infantry advances across mud-choked no man's land, hellish artillery bombardments, sinister clouds of poison gas, rattling machine guns, countless dead and wounded, all located in the hellscape of the Western Front. Now we know about this horror story because it happened, and its story told and illustrated. But it was all new to the people of the time in 1914. It was a shocking surprise. But one man had seen it coming. In fact, he predicted these battlefield horrors some 16 years before it all kicked off. He actually wrote a book about it, more or less describing how World War I would play out. Did anyone pay attention? Not really. Hello, my name is David and this is D&D History Hub, exploring the world of the past. It would be great if you could give us a thumbs up like and consider subscribing to the channel for more history videos. So this book I'm talking about, published in 1898, was titled The War of the Future in its technical, economic and political relations, and it was written by a Polish banker and economist called S Bloch. An abridged version of the book titled Is War Now Impossible was also published in London in 1899 and was energetically publicised by the renowned London newspaper editor and public figure W.T. Stead, and I've put a link below online to that book where you can read it in PDF, and it's in the video description below there. But basically, Bloch contended that the invention of smokeless powder, quick-firing bolt-action rifles, deadly machine guns and powerful, accurate artillery had sparked a great revolution in modern warfare. Bloch argued that a big European war would quickly get locked into a stalemate due to the technical developments of weapons and the ability of modern states to harness all the available and political and economic forces to continue fighting. And the victor would suffer almost as much as the vanquished. Now, Bloch writes that for most of the 19th century, battlefields were no larger than the exercise grounds of a brigade, but they would be unfathomably huge in the war of the future. The most powerful mind will not be able to embrace and combine all the details, requirements and circumstances of such an immense field, he wrote. It would be extremely difficult to overcome the resistance of infantry in sheltered and dug-in positions. What he called the zone of deadly fire would be much wider than before. Battles would be tougher, bloodier and prolonged. Now, the famous British Field-Marshal Bernard Montgomery, who served in World War I as a junior officer and was seriously wounded, writes in his book A History of Warfare that Bloch's warnings were largely ignored by Europe's military commanders because Bloch was not a professional soldier. So, what would he know? This is Monty's book, actually. That's a couple of pictures of the First World War, if you can see them. Big illustrated history of the war. It's actually a very good book. I don't think Monty did much of the writing of it. I think he got some Oxford Don to do it, but it's good, interesting. Now, Bloch had argued that Europe had no generals experienced in leading massive armies and none experienced in keeping them supplied with enormous amounts of ammo and provisions. And a commander incapable of dealing with such complex problems would sustain tremendous losses. Armies were now confronted with an awful phenomenon, he said. They were wedded to the idea of the superiority of offensive action. But meanwhile, such strong defence positions had been created, which would blunt most attacks. The war of the future will be a struggle for fortified positions, and for that reason war must be prolonged, Bloch wrote. Here's another illustration. You can see these guys, pretty typical pictures. So these are British Army guys in a trench on lookout. Now, the British Army had actually been given a foretaste of what was to come in World War One at the Battle of Spionkop in South Africa in January 1900. A well-dug-in Boer unit on higher ground, armed with German-made magazine-fed Mauser rifles, inflicted grievous casualties on a British force almost devoid of cover. The Brits were armed with single-shot Martini Henry rifles. If any of you have seen Zulu, that's the rifle the guys are firing there, and they would have been dressed in those red scarlet uniforms to shoot me. I'm very colourful. Montgomery noted that Spionkop had been called the supreme day in the history of the rifle. And having learned a painful lesson, though, the British went out and produced their own bolt-action Lee Enfield with its sustained 15 rounds rapid or mad minute from each soldier. This made such an impression on the Germans at the Marne in 1914 that many thought they were being fired on by multiple machine guns. And indeed, it was these early actions on the Marne that saw the Germans dig in under fire from these massed rifle attacks, and they hardly moved for the next 3 years or so. World War One was unlike any before it in its scale, complexity, constantly developing technology, automatic weapons, aircraft, tanks, and unprecedented large and well-equipped armies. The top brass didn't come out of it looking good. Monty, who served as a junior officer in World War One and was also seriously wounded, had some very deep concerns about the quality of the senior staff. A remarkable and disgraceful fact is that a high proportion of the most senior officers were ignorant of the conditions in which the soldiers were fighting, he said. The quality of the men who had to do the fighting contrasts with the poor quality of the generals, he wrote. Bloch said that the modern war would be one in which every clash with an enemy would be more threatening, and every mistake, every hesitation would have much more serious consequences than in the past. It would be hell for the modern soldier. Now, I think one of the reasons Bloch's book didn't fully capture the imagination of its intended audience is that he thought all these new developments in weaponry and technology would actually make war literally impossible in future. People would have to be nuts to go ahead and do it. It would be unwinnable, he concluded. And maybe he was close to the truth with that. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time with another D&D History Hub presentation. Goodbye.